The tow arm slid under my SUV like it had done this 100 times before, hydraulics humming, metal tightening, efficient, clinical, and from across my driveway she said it, "Hook it, now, Linda Brooks." HOA president.com. Composed, certain, no warning on my door, no certified letter, no board vote, just confidence, the kind of people they get when they assume no one will challenge them. The driver didn't look at me. Contract vendor, flat rate job, not his problem, but this wasn't random. It was staged. Neighbors were peeking through blinds. Phones were angled discreetly. Linda wanted visibility. Instead of reacting, I walked toward the truck. Slow, measured. Corporate rule number 1. When someone escalates, you slow it down. I stopped near the bumper. "Can I see the written authorization for this tow?" No drama. No accusations, just documentation. The driver paused. Linda didn't answer immediately, and in that half-second silence, something shifted. Because volume sounds powerful, posture feels powerful. But paper is powerful, and she didn't have any. That's when I realized this wasn't about parking. It was about control. And she had just made a very expensive mistake. Linda Brooks doesn't shout. She doesn't need to mid-40s. Corporate background, always polished, always composed. The kind of HOA president who speaks in bullet points. She doesn't threaten, she advises. She doesn't accuse, she documents. Standing next to that tow truck, she looked like she was closing a quarterly review. "Your vehicle has been flagged," she said smoothly. Flagged. Clean word, vague. Strategic. I glanced at my SUV, registered, insured, parked in my own driveway. Flagged for what I asked. She opened her leather folder slowly. Commercial activity, inconsistent with community standards. There it was, not safety, not legality. Optics, my home-based logistics consulting business, had scaled. More deliveries, more vendor traffic, more visibility. And visibility bothers people who equate appearance with control. Linda believes that if something sounds official, it becomes enforceable. She nodded toward the driver. "Proceed." Still no paperwork, still no written violation, just certainty. The driver hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw it clearly. Linda wasn't acting on authority, she was acting on an assumption, and assumptions collapse the moment someone asks for proof. The tow driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I need written authorization tied to the VIN. VIN specific, procedural, real." Linda didn't like that. "It's an HOA directive," she replied. "Understood," he said carefully. "But I need paperwork." Paperwork, not policy quotes, not highlighted bylaws. Paperwork. She flipped through her folder pages. Notes, highlighted sections, nothing with my address. Nothing signed. I stepped slightly closer. "Sir," I said calmly, "if you remove that vehicle without written authorization, that becomes wrongful tow liability." Liability, that word hit differently. The driver's hand moved off the control lever. Hydraulics eased. The SUV lowered half an inch. Linda's composure tightened. Obstructing enforcement," she said. No one responded. Neighbors were watching now, because something subtle had happened. The hook was still under my SUV, but the control, it was no longer hers. The hook was still under my vehicle. Linda was still standing there, as this had already decided. That's when I introduced myself properly. "My name is Daniel Mercer," I said evenly. "I run a licensed logistics consulting firm. County approved, zoned correctly, documented." The driver looked at me differently. "I don't operate in gray areas," I continued. "If there's a violation, show it. If there's authorization, produce it." Linda folded her arms. "This isn't about your business license." But it was. My company had grown. More shipments, more branded vans, all legal, but growth shifts optics, and in HOA politics, optics trigger control attempts. Review the bylaws, I added. There's no clause allowing removal from a private driveway without written board approval. Neighbors were fully outside now. Linda said, "You're making this complicated." "No," I replied. "I'm making this documented." Silence, heavier this time, because this wasn't parking enforcement anymore. It was overreach, and overreach doesn't disappear quietly once it's witnessed. The hook was still under my vehicle. Linda was still standing there, as this had already decided. That's when I introduced myself properly. My name is Daniel Mercer, I said evenly. I run a licensed logistics consulting firm. County approved, zoned correctly, documented. The driver looked at me differently. I don't operate in gray areas, I continued. If there's a violation, show it. If there's authorization, produce it. Linda folded her arms. This isn't about your business license. But it was. My company had grown. More shipments, more branded vans, all legal, but growth shifts optics, and in HOA politics, optics trigger control attempts. Review the bylaws, I added. There's no clause allowing removal from a private driveway without written board approval. Neighbors were fully outside now. Linda said, "You're making this complicated." "No," I replied. "I'm making this documented." Silence, heavier this time, because this wasn't parking enforcement anymore. It was overreach, and overreach doesn't disappear quietly once it's witnessed. The tow truck didn't leave. It idled low, steady, waiting. Linda stood still, calculating. She wasn't used to resistance in public. Usually one email from her was enough to shut things down. Then the headlights turned onto the street. A black sedan pulled up behind the tow truck. Linda straightened instantly. "Good," she said under her breath. "Now we'll resolve this." The door opened. Mark Reynolds stepped out, HOA Vice President Finance background. Quiet, process-oriented, not emotional. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the truck, then at Linda. "What's the authorization number?" he asked. No greeting. No small talk. Just that. Linda hesitated. "It's under compliance review," she replied. Mark didn't move. I asked for the authorization number. Silence. The neighbors leaned in without moving, because now this wasn't homeowner versus HOA, this was internal. Mark turned to the tow driver. "Do you have a signed directive from the board?" The driver shook his head. Mark exhaled slowly. This action was never approved. And just like that, the problem wasn't my SUV anymore. It was Linda. Linda didn't collapse. She pivoted. "It didn't require full board review," she said calmly. "It was an enforcement matter." Mark's expression didn't change. "No removal action is enforcement only," he replied. "It requires documented approval." Documented, that word again. The neighbors weren't whispering anymore. They were observing. Linda adjusted her folder. "There have been concerns about commercial expansion." "Concerns, not violations filed." Mark asked. Pause. "No documented complaints?" he asked. Another pause. "No." Mark nodded slightly. "So this was interpretive enforcement." Interpretive, that word stripped it down. Interpretation isn't law. Interpretation isn't authorization. Interpretation doesn't justify vendor dispatch. The tow truck driver began slowly disengaging. The hook metal lifted. Arm folded. Linda watched it happen. She didn't tell him to stop, because she couldn't. Authority without backing has limits, and those limits had just been reached. Mark stepped slightly aside and lowered his voice. "This creates exposure," he said to Linda, not loud, not dramatic. Calculated. Linda crossed her arms. "You're overreacting." "No," Mark replied evenly. "I'm preventing liability." Liability, the neighbors heard it. "If that vehicle had been removed," he continued, "the association would be facing wrongful tow claims. Insurance involvement. Legal review." Each phrase landed heavier than the last. Linda tried to steady the narrative. "I was protecting property values." Mark didn't respond immediately. He looked at the truck, then at the neighbors. "Property values," he said slowly, "decline faster when lawsuits get filed." Silence, because everyone knew that was true. The tow truck engine shut off completely. The driver was done waiting. This wasn't his risk. It was hers. And once liability enters the conversation, authority gets quiet. Mark turned fully toward Linda. "This goes on the next agenda," he said. Linda reacted quickly. "That's unnecessary." "Vendor dispatch without authorization isn't unnecessary," Mark replied. "It's structural. That word changed the tone. Because structural issues don't disappear, they get reviewed. Linda attempted one final pivot. I acted in good faith. Mark nodded. Good faith doesn't override procedure. The neighbors didn't speak. They didn't need to. The tow truck shifted into reverse. Slow. Deliberate. It rolled away from my driveway. Linda stood still. Composed but smaller, because this wasn't a driveway issue anymore. It was a governance review. And governance review doesn't happen quietly. 3 days later, the board meeting was full, standing room only. Mark opened with item 1, vendor authorization and enforcement oversight. Linda tried to frame it. There was confusion around interpretation. Mark projected the policy onto the screen. Section 3.2. Vehicle removal requires a documented violation and board-approved directive written undeniable. He asked for a motion reform. Vendor procedures require dual signature approval. Mandate written notice before removal attempts. Hands went up. Unanimous. Linda didn't argue. You don't argue with votes. Authority didn't disappear that night. It was redistributed. Process replaced impulse. And that shift, that's permanent. Mark closed the meeting calmly, moving forward. No enforcement action occurs without written authorization. No theatrics, no accusations, just structure. Linda still held the title, but titles don't override policy. The tow incident wasn't discussed again publicly. It didn't need to be. Because once governance gets clarified, behavior adjusts. I received written confirmation 2 days late. No violation. No enforcement action. No pending review. Clean. Professional. Documented. The tow truck never returned. Not because I fought louder. Because I slowed it down. Asked for proof. Required authorization. That's the difference most people miss. You don't defeat overreach with emotion. You defeat it with documentation. This was never about a vehicle. It was about power without paperwork. Linda assumed that position equaled authority. It doesn't. Procedure does. When someone moves fast, references policy vaguely, and speaks confidently, they're hoping you won't slow it down. Slow it down. Ask for the policy. Ask for the signature. Ask for the authorization number. I didn't argue. I didn't escalate. I asked for documentation, and once documentation entered the conversation, the bluff collapsed. The board restructured. Vendor approval. Dual signatures became mandatory. Written notice became required, not because of conflict, because of exposure. Paper beats posture every time. If you like real stories where overreach gets handled the smart way, subscribe. Because this isn't about drama. It's about understanding how authority actually works, and how to handle it when someone tries to use it on you. See you in the next one.